Hey, how are you guys? So at the turn of the 19th to 20th century, so around late 1800s, early 1900s, London was the place to be. England was the place to be. It was obviously the biggest empire in world history. It was extremely developed. The Industrial Revolution started there, and it really took off there as well. England had been one of the few countries that hadn't been conquered by Napoleon in the early 19th century. It was a philosophical and economic and technological hub, like absolutely. Obviously, there were some up-and-coming countries. America already was a notable force. Germany, after its unification, started developing really, really quickly, which actually led, in a way, to World War One as well. But London was objectively the most developed, better place to be in that sense. Obviously, in terms of opportunities, it could vary. It's very individual, but overall, England was an excellent country. Whereas many of the English colonies, I know Australia was pretty well off, New Zealand was decent as well, Ireland was really poor. America was developing, but England was still like the place to be. And out of all those countries I mentioned, so America, Canada, Ireland, the UK, or England, uh, New Zealand, and Australia. Those, let's call it, the six major English-speaking countries that were all, at one point or another, colonized by Great Britain. All those countries, they were pretty on pair, at least in the last 50, 60 years. Obviously, England after World War One and World War Two fell a little bit. America started becoming like the major world power, but you could still argue up until the 1990s really that the UK had certain advantages, America had certain advantages. Ireland was pretty much objectively poorer than all those other countries throughout the 20th century. Canada was a really good place to live, but like the UK and England, like they held their ground. Let's call it that. And even when I lived there in 2011, 2012. It was still a remarkable country to live. You know, it really, really worked. There were many things to be proud of in sense of how the country worked. And especially in the last 15 years, though some could argue that it's been going on for like decades, the UK has kind of objectively become the worst English-speaking country, like in the sense of those six, to actually live in. Australia obviously now has objectively better wages than Britain. There's so many British citizens that are English citizens that move to Australia for better work, for better quality of life, for better weather, and especially for better salaries. So, some people say they come from the UK, do the same job, and they're actually making double what they made in the UK. In New Zealand, obviously, the single most common ancestry is English as well. I know plenty of Kiwis who are at least half English or full English in terms of descent, and it might be one of the favorite locations in the world for UK citizens to move themselves to. They're like more isolated, nice mountains, slightly better climate than the UK, though not as good as Australia, some would argue. And even though New Zealand is not as good as Australia, the wages there, especially since it started developing a little quicker in the 90s and 2000, it kind of caught up. And I think most people would rather live in New Zealand than the UK now. Same with Ireland. Ireland, like I said, I've made a whole video about Ireland before. Throughout the 20th century, throughout the 19th century, throughout history, really, Ireland was just poorer than Britain, objectively. And they were colonized, and they were, some would say, oppressed. And let's call it, Ireland was not as good of a place to be as England. And for the past 10 years now, Ireland has actually had better wages with virtually similar shitty weather. So you can, like, sure, maybe some places in the UK have better weather than like the average of Ireland, but it overall, like, they're pretty much similar in terms of having bad weather. Ireland obviously is still in the EU, so if you're an Irish citizen, your passport is much more valuable than if you're a UK citizen. The average wages in Ireland have become higher. Tech jobs in Ireland pay more. Finance jobs, I guess, in London especially, they'll still pay more than Ireland. But to have that change in the last 20, 30 years, where 30 years it would be inconceivable for someone to move from the UK to Ireland for economic reasons. And now it is. It's conceivable, and it's actually happening. Canada, the US, they've been having their own personal problems, obviously. But if you compare any salary for any position anywhere in the UK and the US is going to pay double, triple. And obviously, we've had a lot of reports on the NHS getting gradually worse, gradually more, let's say, complicated to access and with worse and worse service. And England, which was once, even just 100 years ago, objectively the better, best, richest country in the world, can't even hold its own now with all of its previous colonies. And it's really sad, really. And obviously, the title of the video is how it became that way. But the truth is, I don't even know. I don't even know if my theory is as good as yours. If you've lived in England for longer, I only lived in England for 1 year, and it was a long time ago. Obviously, I was there in 2024, so last year wasn't that long ago, and I could see it firsthand. I've talked to a lot of British citizens, and the sentiment of Britain has been getting worse is almost universal. Obviously, it's very common pretty much anywhere you go. Like if you talk to Germans, to Italians, to French people, to Americans, even to Australians somewhat, they'll say, yeah, the country isn't as good as it used to be. And it could be true, but nowhere is the sentiment as absolute, in my opinion, as in Britain. And obviously, you're going to see some immigration issues in Britain, definitely. You're going to see violence issues, especially in London, where it's gradually not becoming safe anymore. And Britain has actually been, out of the countries in the West, the one that has been losing the most millionaires, I think billionaires as well, I'm not sure. And it's just losing competitiveness, because honestly, if you're in the UK and you're an entrepreneur, if you want to stay in Europe, you might as well go to Ireland and access the whole EU market, have a better regulatory framework, pay less corporate taxes, and be in a safer country. Or you might as well just move to America, and obviously America just has a whole creative, innovative hub of its own. And so the UK kind of becomes this middle term where it's not good for Europe, it's not good for it's not good for the European dream, it's not good for the American dream. And honestly, now with the I've talked previously about the Kensington dream, the dream of countries like Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and also the UK. It just is a fact that the Kensington dream lives better. That is, it's more properly upheld in Australia, in New Zealand, in Canada, and with obviously the ease of movement, not complete obviously, but with the flexible working holiday arrangement and the common English language and all that. What has been happening is that the English people have been leaving, and they have been moving to Canada and to America and to Ireland and to Europe and to Australia and to New Zealand. And obviously the UK still gains population because it has massive immigration from other countries, especially now out of the EU, outside of Europe. And one thing that's interesting to consider on immigration is that obviously Brexit was a vote pretty much on immigration. People were concerned about immigration, they were concerned about regulatory frameworks. And then the UK left the EU, but first of all, it didn't deregulate. Like, the UK is still very rigid in terms of taxes, instead in terms of regulation. It's not attractive for business at all lately. And in terms of immigration has actually gone up after Brexit. The only difference is that before Brexit, a lot of the immigration were Polish people, or Hungarians, or Italians, or French people, or Germans who went to the UK as London was the city to be in Europe. It was objectively the capital of Europe, and now it isn't anymore. Not only because it's not in the EU, but also because, well, it's still obviously considered, along with New York, the two most connected cities in the world. But you can live off your past for a long while. Like, you can live off the bet that you made for yourself for a long, long while, even after all those premises are not true anymore. And I think that might be what's happening with England, where eventually people are going to realize that it's not the dream, and it's not the all that it was stacked up to be. Not because it never was like that, but because it gradually got worse. And so you can live off the past for a while. Europe has been living off their past, off their beautiful churches, off their beautiful history, off their beautiful economic growth in the 40s and 50s and 60s. It's been living off it. It built like a superb, really impressive welfare state off of it. But you can only live off your past. You can only live off your past riches for a while. You know, if your parents got rich, you're probably fine. Your children are probably fine. Your grandchildren are probably fine. But as you go and move on and on, generations after generation, if you're not generating wealth, if you're not being innovative, if you're not like truly creating something new, eventually you're going to fall behind. And we see that with the EU. I've talked about the EU before, but especially we see that with the UK. And it's really sad because having lived there, specifically as a kid, obviously I'm not British, I'm not anything in particular related to the UK. I'm not even originally European, but I've always had a certain connection with the UK in the sense of like, I respect their culture so much. I think British people are really polite. I think they have some amazing history. I think that it's not a coincidence that nearly all of the richest countries in the world right now, and the freest countries in the world right now, were colonized by Britain. Ireland, Singapore, Hong Kong, Australia, New Zealand, some of the freest countries in the world right now, some of the richest countries in the world right now, they were all colonized by Britain at one point or another. And I think that the English framework for law, for common law, for economic development, and for just human rights, really, it's amazing. It's a history that British people, English people should be proud of, and yet they themselves don't follow it anymore. And now in the UK, people were locked up for what was the guy from Scotland who taught his dog to do the salute and something, and he was like locked up or whatever. And now I know that there's been God knows how many free speech issues in 2024 and 2023 and even now in 2025. And like, not as a British person, because I'm not as someone who's lived there recently, or not even as someone who lives there currently, but yet I'm just sad to see what's happening. I'm sad to see it become a shadow of its former self, and with no real good solutions, I feel, because Brexit was a solution, and economically and socially it's objectively been a disaster. You could argue that it's because it was made by people who didn't want to. Brexit was completed and executed by people who didn't want to execute it in the first place, and only executed it out of obligation because of the referendum. So what you got was just the worst of Brexit, because you didn't get the UK staying in the EU, but you also didn't get the UK properly leaving with a framework that would be interesting for the UK and for the EU. And I've talked about it before. I think one of the best solutions to the EU problem, where some people want to distance, some countries want to distance themselves from the EU, and some countries want further integration, is the Switzerland model. Switzerland, obviously through negotiation, it picks and chooses what it wants, and it's part of the free market. It's part of the Schengen area. It's part of the free movement of goods and people, but it's not part of the customs union. It's not part of the tariff regime. It's not part of the euro, and I think that is by far the most comprehensive way forward for Europe. And yet the UK had this opportunity to leave in good terms and still being connected to Europe in a interesting framework, and it missed it. It's not, at least not right now, at least not in 25. And then obviously in 2016, 2017, 2018, Kensington was a huge, not huge, come on, for our level, for our niche political debates. It was like growing stronger and stronger, and obviously it would be a very interesting way for the UK to reposition itself as one of the leaders of the free nations, with the EU on one side, the US on the other, and Kensington obviously not led necessarily by the UK, but out of which the UK has the biggest population, it's the only nuclear power, it's the only country out of Kensington in the UN Security Council, and obviously it is a geopolitical force, let's call it. It had the chance to set itself up for that, but now, 10 years later nearly, what do you even hear about Kensington? Like, there's virtually nothing recent on Kensington on the internet anymore, and I really don't know where the UK is heading. I don't know whether it's gonna properly survive what it's going through. I don't think like a dissolution or absolute crisis is necessarily going to happen, but in a way, it might be just following the paths of countries like Italy or Greece or Japan, where it just quietly goes down. It quietly dies. And at one point or another, you're going to notice it's dead, and you're not even going to know the cause, because it's been gradually happening for 30 or 40 or 60 years. But yeah, I hope you guys liked the video. Comments below, and I'll see you guys around.